For short.
My name is Scott Edelman, and I am here to read you a story that will be out in the November-December issue of Analog. And before I begin, I should say it took me 44 years to sell a story to Analog. I first submitted in 1972, sent them one every couple of months, couple a year, for the following 44 years, and then finally sold them one story last year, which appeared in the January-February issue, and then lo and behold, just a few months later, I sold them a second story. So if we figure it out, it took 44 years for the first story and 4 months for the second story. That means the next one should sell in 2 months, and then a week, and then finally I'll be selling one every few minutes. So if we follow that. But I'm going to read the first few scenes of a story titled How Val Finally Escaped from the Basement. Val liked working nights at the Flaketown Dash Mart, especially those shifts that sent him to the children's department way in the rear of the store. Few customers ever made it back there that late, so as he put the finishing touches on a crib he'd been assembling under the fluorescent lights, the solitude filled him with a sense of peace. He was alone there. He felt safe. He could breathe. And then he couldn't. Everything changed shortly after he unboxed a mobile meant until later, when it would dangle over a newborn, to catch the eyes of shoppers as it rotated near the crib's wooden headboard. Instead, unexpectedly, the mobile caught his eyes, and then he found himself suddenly holding it much too tight. Rocket ships and robots dangled around the central planet he couldn't recognize and didn't want to try. All he assumed were modeled after a recent blockbuster science fiction movie, a movie he imagined he might once have liked had only he seen it years before, but which now he'd never willingly watched, just one of the many things his uncle's death and all that came after had stolen from him. He'd been about to hook the mobile to the crib and flick the switch that would start the music playing and the cheap plastic miniatures spinning when he hesitated as it all suddenly became too much. It was only when he noticed the rocket ships dancing at the ends of their strings that he realized he was trembling and was startled to discover he needed to fight back tears. Damn rocket ships. If he never saw another rocket ship, never heard anyone speak of them, of outer space, of aliens again, that would be just fine with him. Damn those who'd come in those tin cans for what they'd given. Damn them for what they'd taken away. He closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose to stop from crying. It would destroy all he'd been working for to be found that way after he'd been doing so well at his new job, even with the sketchy past he's had to fabricate for his employer, and he didn't want to be forced to move on with a new look and a new name yet again so soon, so soon. And when he opened his eyes once more, a man was staring at him. A man alone in the children's department, a place where mostly only couples or perhaps a lone woman would wander, and that during the day. Seeing him there at night when that section was usually deserted made Val even more uncomfortable. The man was bearded and appeared haunted, with a gaze that made it seem as if he was looking less at what was in front of him than things a million miles away. But then Val suspected he would also have appeared pretty much the same to anyone who happened to glance in his direction. For Val, the haunted look had come first. The beard, a necessary disguise, followed later. Sometimes that beard helped with what he was trying to do. Sometimes it didn't. He returned to tinkering with the crib, less because he still needed to attach the mobile to complete his task than because he wanted to turn his back at that moment on the man's unwanted stare. Too many people had looked at him for too long, looked and maybe worse, but maybe he'd be lucky this time. Maybe the man was a confused customer and nothing more. Then, "You," came a voice from behind as Val felt the hand on his elbow. "You're him. You are, aren't you? You're the nephew." Val turned slowly, looked in the man's eyes, and recognized there that expression which told him he'd been recognized. He threw the mobile at the man, who didn't bother to try to catch it, and then ran. He didn't get far. Val could hear his name being shouted, not the one by which his co-workers at Dashmart had come to know him, but his true name, the one he'd abandoned many jobs, many cities, seemingly many lifetimes ago in order to survive. He ignored the call, but couldn't ignore the stinging in his back as darts pierced his shirt and embedded in his skin. Couldn't ignore the surge of electricity that followed. He convulsed against the tower of infant formula and fell, first onto linoleum and then into unconsciousness. Val awoke to find himself tied to a chair, his ankles bound by duct tape to its legs, his chest bound against its back. And as best as he could tell, he was in a windowless room of a type far too familiar to him. The cinder block walls of what surely, damnably, had to be a basement were obscured for the most part by industrial shelving loaded with random clutter that gave him no clue as to either the owner or his location. And stacked in the gaps bare shelving were a random assortment of liquor boxes, dented suitcases, and yellowing newspapers. Above him, a bare light bulb buzzed. Propped against a metal folding chair opposite him was a poster-sized slice of corrugated cardboard on which had been mounted a large photograph of an elderly man who had tubes running from his nose. Yet even with those tubes and the obvious pain on his face, the man still managed to smile at whoever had been on the opposite side of the camera. Val had no idea who this subject was exactly, but he felt he could be fairly certain of his relationship to the man who had captured him. He was his father, Val imagined. He appeared too old to be his captor's brother, and would anyone have bothered capturing him like this for an uncle? Probably not. Well, Val wouldn't have anyway. He craned his neck in an attempt to learn whether the rest of the room behind him was as dismal as what was in front of him. When he failed in that, he tried to twist a chair around, but could not, for it had been bolted into the floor. His abduction had not been spontaneous. Someone had been planning for this. "I know what you're thinking," came a voice from the unseen section of the room. His captor stepped into view. He no longer looked quite so haunted. "And yes, you are. You're in a basement." "That wasn't what I was thinking." "Was your uncle's basement anything like this one?" "No," said Val. "It was nothing like this. Nothing in the world could ever be anything like that basement. Now, nothing like my uncle. You know that, don't you?" Though maybe Val refused to let himself finish the thought. "Yet you don't seem surprised to be here." "Why wouldn't I be? I knew I'd end up here eventually. Well, not exactly, but some other place like this. A person can only run so fast and so far." Val tilted his head toward the sickly man's image, one not so unlike hundreds of others he had thrust toward him before he vanished. "And that is?" "He was my father," said the man, stepping up beside the photograph. "And your uncle killed him." "My uncle may have been foolish. My uncle may have let a lot of people down. Only a whole planet, but he didn't kill anybody." "Keep telling yourself that," the man said, pointing angrily at Val, then taking a deep breath and slowly letting his hand drop. "Your uncle was a bad, bad man. And if you can't see that, you're a bad, bad man too." "Maybe I am," Val said wearily, "but not for the reasons you think. Some things are much worse than anything my uncle ever did." Val nodded at the photograph once more. "Nothing you could possibly do to me is going to bring him back," he said. "Surely you know. The world has changed, but it hasn't changed that much." "I know," answered the man, "but seeing you trapped down here, knowing I've got you the same way your uncle had that thing locked away, that's going to make me feel a whole lot better about it. How many years did your uncle keep it hidden?" "No one really knows for sure." "Well, I guess it doesn't really matter," said the man, vanishing again behind Val, who could hear rising footsteps as the voice trailed off. "You'll be down here even longer, so get used to looking at my father's face. You'll be seeing a whole lot of it during the months ahead." It had been several years since Val had last heard from his Uncle Tommy or made any attempt to reach out on his own, which was wrong, he knew, yet knowing that it never motivated him to change, when the call came from the lawyer. At first, not recognizing the number, Val wasn't going to answer, but then the area code tickled his memory and he had a sick feeling he'd better pick up. It turned out to be a lawyer whose name he vaguely recalled from when his father had died. And after she verified it really was Val she was talking to, the woman informed him that it was his uncle who had passed this time. He was the only surviving heir, and how did he wish to proceed? Val and his uncle had never been close, and he'd always felt somewhat guilty about that, more guilty than he felt about having turned his back on most of his family. His father's brother deserved a better nephew, and Val was not, and never had been, that. On learning of Uncle Tommy's death, Val was surprised to discover that what rose up inside wasn't more of that same guilt. Instead, it was the uncomfortable self-awareness, which had previously risen up many times over the years, that he wasn't only not such a good nephew, he wasn't even as good a person as he liked to pretend himself to be. The guilt, when it came, and it would come, would only arrive later once he got the thick envelope of paperwork and learned Uncle Tommy still owned that house, and the house was now his. And he found himself thinking more about the windfall he pocketed from its sale than the loss of what to most other people would have been a close relative. But that guilt was small compared to the guilt he'd feel later once he actually got inside, once he made it into the basement. He took a week off from work, no problem from him considering all the unused vacation time he'd accumulated, which had even gotten to be a joke around the office, and drove to the lawyer's where he picked up the keys, accompanied by condolences Val accepted grimly. It turned out, he learned, that the words "sorry for your loss" fall quite uncomfortably on the ears when one doesn't feel that much of a loss at all. He planned to give the house a cursory inspection, quickly see how little he could get away with in the way of repairs, what was the least that needed to be done to get the place in shape for a quick sale, and then go back to his apartment and back to his life, such as it was. And he knew, since he was being honest with himself, that if he thought of his uncle at all from then on, it would be to tamp down the accompanying shame that he let the man die alone. And he'd do a good job of it, too. The small house in the suburbs that Uncle Tommy had occupied alone ever since he'd inherited it after his parents had died and left it to him was in much better shape than Val had expected. He thought he'd enter to find evidence of years of hoarding with narrow mazes winding through piles of junk. Isn't that what eventually happens to all bachelors when they don't have friends or relatives checking up on them and pushing them to do better? But instead the rooms were neat and clean with no sense that there lived a loner. It was so orderly it made Val feel a bit embarrassed about the state of his own apartment. In fact, its starkness surprised him, for as he walked through the house devoid of clutter, devoid even of personality, he got no sense of who his uncle was. No family photos on the walls hinted at a shared family history. No souvenirs gave evidence of trips taken. No shelving filled with well-thumbed books. There wasn't a sense of, well, Tomminess, not a single clue as to the life he lived. But Val shouldn't have needed any clues to form a picture of his uncle. He should have known. He and Uncle Tommy had never been close, and as he wandered a house which seemed as if it had already been ready for sale, though the lawyer had assured Val he discovered nothing had been touched, everything would be just as they'd found it after the neighbors had called the police and the police had found the lawyer's number. He no longer remembered why, and it seemed like a thing he should remember. There was so little to see up on the ground level that he got to the basement sooner than he expected, and as it turned out, sooner than he would have liked. Once more, there were no obvious signs of who the man had been. The metal shelves that lined the cinder block walls were filled with a random assortment of tools, a couple of lamps, and a few illegibly labeled dusty boxes that on first glance yielded no immediate information. He could have been in the center of anybody's basement. As he scanned the shelves, searching for something, anything that could have belonged to more than just a random stranger, an artifact or two that would tell him who Uncle Tommy had been, he spotted, barely visible between two boxes, the corner edges of a large piece of wood mounted to the wall. Only after he moved those boxes aside could he tell that what he'd revealed was the covering of an opening to the house's crawl space. And in addition to the edges of the wood screwed into the wall, a long vertical board held it in place, the board affixed with a hinge on the top end and a hole in the bottom that settled over a metal loop. And through the protruding loop, a lock. What could Uncle Tommy have owned valuable enough to lock away? None of the keys given to Val by the lawyer fit, so he rummaged through the tools in search of a crowbar. He couldn't find one there, though he did set aside a screwdriver, but upstairs in the garage he came across a sturdy shovel which seemed as if it would be strong enough to serve. He returned to the basement and moved the rest of the boxes out of his way, then jammed the lip of the shovel under the board near the hinge, put his weight against the handle until the screws wrenched out of the wood. As he did so, watching the board rock like a pendulum from the broken lock, it occurred to him, anyone could have done what he just did, so perhaps the safeguards Uncle Tommy had built weren't really intended to keep anyone out. Val unscrewed the corners of the board, which then dropped to the cement floor, exposing the rectangular opening of the crawl space. He squinted into the darkness, looking for the sort of thing he imagined might have been worth hiding there. A strong box, perhaps, or maybe coffee cans that could have been stuffed with cash, anything to hint his uncle had earned something worth protecting over the years. He heard of old people doing that, losing faith in banks and hiding cash. Cash that was often never found until years after it had rotted. But as he stared into the space, which extended far deeper than he would have expected, he could make out nothing. He tilted his head to allow more light to enter from the bare basement bulb. For a moment, he thought he could see light glinting off the metallic grillwork of a window screen, but who would bother storing window screens in there, and what window screens would be circular? And that's when Val found himself looking into the eyes of the creature from another world. We'll stop there. The first three scenes of about a 12,000 word story will be...
I hate you. That's where you stop.
Well, I only get my share of time here. You want to stop at the point that makes you want to find that issue of analog. And now I can have one of my chocolate.